Will do.
So, yeah, it's been a little bit.
Yeah, man.
You know, our schedules have both been a little crazy, and we haven't been able to jump on, but it's good to be back on here together so we can talk a little training and, yeah, hopefully give some people some good information about progressive overload and what we're going to talk about today. So how's everything been? Hope everything's well still.
Yeah, lots changed since the last trainer talk.
Right.
The main one being I have another child.
Yep. Congrats on that.
Thank you.
So everyone listening, watching will part of the basis of what we're going to talk about is getting a stress response. You can imagine adding another child to the family. I'm sure Korey is experiencing a little bit of stress, a little different kind than what we're going to talk about today, but nonetheless, that is a stress on the body. So
yes,
what looks like you're handling
it does factor
well.
in.
That it does. Very, very much so. So, yeah, I mean, good to hear. Congrats to you and your wife. Glad to hear everything on that end is going well so far. So hopefully that stays the case, and yeah, everything keeps progressing, I guess, in the right direction there. So yeah, a little smooth. So everyone watching and listening again, thank you for hopping on and joining us. You've probably seen the promo that we're going to talk about progressive overload today. And I think that whether or not, I think this is something that whether or not people realize they're doing it or not, they're and they're training consistently, they're always working to get better, and they're finding ways to progress or adapt their workouts so that they don't get stagnant, so that their workouts don't get stale, and they continue seeing progress in their workouts. When I was looking at this topic, I was thinking, you know, you can, I guess boiling down to what it really is, I mean, you can call it progressive overload, you can call it overload, you can call it training progression. Basically, if you want to, like I said, if you want to keep improving and advancing your training, you know, regardless of your goals, whether that is, you know, your goal is to increase strength, increase hypertrophy, fat loss, if you want to increase or improve aerobic capacity, you have to constantly change your workouts to get a different stress response. So I guess if we're stripping it down, the way I'm looking at this is, you know, there are a few different definitions that you can kind of point to explain all of this, but they, to me anyway, they really kind of point toward the same similar idea or concept. I know the NSCA defines overload as specifically assigning a workout or training regimen of greater intensity than the athlete or the person is accustomed to, and they follow that up with progression, which is anything that promotes long-term training benefits. So if you want to talk directly about the overload principle, we can point to the philosophy that, you know, training has to be a sufficient, you know, volume, intensity, frequency to stimulate a stress response, like I mentioned a couple minutes ago. And I think that's really what it boils down to. You know, like I said, if you're making progress, if you're doing what you can to continue to get that stress response, regardless of your goals, you have to find that sweet spot for your specific training. You have to consider your goals and figure out what you need to do to kind of constantly create that stimulus and get a response.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have anything to add to that right there. I mean, that's...
Yeah, this concept of progressive overload, of needing to introduce a stimulus that is beyond or slightly greater than the current capabilities of the individual is really what we're talking about here. And you mentioned goals several times, and I think goals, knowing what the goal is or having some goal is an important aspect of this, because the goal tells you how the overload needs to be applied and what the overload can look like. Like, there's so many different ways, like you said, you can overload. And a lot, I mean, this has, you know, I guess from my perspective and my experience, this has roots in strength training with when the two variables that are often tied to overload are intensity and volume, right? That's where most people go to initially. Those are the most common variables that are manipulated. Mm-hmm. And again, with regards to the concept, that's really what we're usually looking at, is like the manipulation of these training program variables: intensity, right, volume, frequency, density, things like that. But I think now we can take that principle and apply it to all different types of all concepts.
Right.
So at intensity, from a strength training perspective, intensity is typically defined as what's the percentage that the load is to our 1 rep maximum. Mm-hmm. Like, that's intensity.
Right.
Now, when we get to the world of fitness, working out, like, that can be a little muddy, because some people just see intensity as how like hard is something, how hard am I working, mm-hmm, which is related, because right, the closer you are to a 1 RM from a percentage standpoint, that is harder. Mm-hmm. Okay. But intensity, just as, I think a good way to look at intensity from an overload standpoint is, how close are you to your maximum? Right. How close are you to everything you can give? So now, okay, if we look at it from that perspective, when we are looking at how hard does something feel, as professionals, now we're thinking, RPE, mm-hmm, rating of perception. That is something that I can actually gauge. Right. I assign some type of value to. So let's say, I used to be a boot camp instructor, right? Okay. And this is a class. This is kind of, from the strength and performance world, might look and see there's no progressive overload to this. It's just random. It's throwing a bunch of things in a workout, and what it's just random. Mm-hmm. There's some elements to that, because the exercise selection is going to be much varied than a typical sports performance or other goals like a powerlifter or a bodybuilder. Right. Now, I think you and I'd agree there's a client aspect to that, of like, we need to have client engagement, but right, what we could still do from an overload standpoint is still try to educate the client or the class on an RPE value. Like, how hard is this for you on a scale of 1 to 10? Right. Does it work out a 7, an 8, or whatever it may be? Or maybe, you could encourage, and I would actually say this is an important aspect of overload, is the balance between the stimulus and the recovery aspect of things. Maybe you could encourage people to say, like, all right, or encourage people to think about, if you're not, all there today, if you're like me and you're running out 4 hours of sleep, right? Maybe you work at a 6 today. Regardless of what the workout is, regardless of what we've got on the board or what's on your sheet, you're at a 6 out of 10 today. And that is how you are going to adjust things based on your recovery ability and the other stressors, the other demands that you have going on. Right. So just these are very speaking to the broader terms and the concept of progressive overload. But when we take the concept of something like intensity, that's how you can now apply this to a bunch of different situations and scenarios. And it still holds true across them. Like another one that I was thinking about yesterday when just trying to think about this talk was something like speed. Right. Speed training is classically something where in the weight room and in strength training, there's percentages assigned. We know for this many reps at this load, this is what we can expect. And historically, speed training has been like, well, you just got to run fast. Right. You got to run fast. And that's true, because there still needs to be an overload. Like, if you run faster more often than you're used to, in theory, that would make the adaptation is, I'm going to get faster. Mm-hmm. But then if you think about it in terms of weight room, okay, let's say I'm sprinting as fast as possible every single rep, every session. What is that akin to? Maxing out. Maxing, right. So, you might get away with that because Because if someone has never done that, what are they? They're a novice.
Right.
They're a noob. They can get away with it, so to speak. Now, if we think about this from a long-term perspective, maybe there are days where we only hit 80%, 90%, or certain times where we're hitting 80%, 90% of max speed. And you can time that if you want to. I know that's become very popular. Sure. With now that timing systems are very, very they're way easier to attain. They're way more affordable these days. But you could also again sign RPE, like max 10 is this. You're running away from a bear, right?
Yep.
You're gonna run in a 9 right now for the next 3 reps or so, because I want you to focus on your arm action, your leg action, getting all that kind of stuff. So I'll stop there. Those are just kind of like, some of the things I think about when it comes to overload, and like what can we apply as trainers? How can you, if you're in your own workout and you're thinking, how can I progress this? Those I think are just some good key takeaways from the concept of progressive overload.
And I think those are excellent points, and kind of building on that, my experience right now is largely, junior high school age athletes. And in talking about that stress response and like thinking about all the other stresses that are on your body, like maybe you could still get that stress response even if you don't think that you're doing as well as what you did the previous week, if that makes sense. So, I'll have an athlete come in and say they are, we're deadlifting, and I have them doing sets of 3, and they come in and they get so disappointed. They're so bummed that they can't lift as much as they did last week. And I kind of, just kind of talking through it and like, hey, every week is different. Every day is different. You were feeling great last week, but guess what? You have final exams this week. Like, you didn't get much sleep last night because you had a game late last night. So I think those are all things to consider and to take into consideration, I guess, when you are training, because you are training for that stress response. But if your body is already stressed, your max might not be the same as your max from a previous session, just because of everything that else that you have going on in your life. Like if you went to lift right now on 4 hours of sleep, probably not going to be able to lift as heavy as what you did maybe a month ago, right?
Yeah. 4 hours of sleep, but on the average for the past 2 months, 5 a night.
Okay.
Intermittent.
Right.
Not once. And then, there's a toddler too.
Right.
The toddler, that might actually add another element of stress here.
Right.
But like the great point that you make, and the takeaway, I think, is progressive overload is not just one thing. Mm-hmm. It's not just increasing the weight on the bar.
Yeah.
I mean, that can be a goal. But it doesn't, if that's not happening in a way that is linear, that's not like, that doesn't mean you're not applying progressive overload.
Right.
Same thing with volume, the overall amount of work that you're doing, with total sets, total reps, meters run, distance covered, whatever it may be. Just because that isn't always increasing linearly,
right?
That doesn't mean it's not being applied. Now, you would want to see that increase as a trend over time,
right?
But you can undulate that, or you can. It doesn't always have to go in this like linear increase fashion. So, really, what we're getting at is autoregulation. Like that's what we're getting at as far as like. You, as you walk into a session every day, are not the same. Mm-hmm. If you've got finals, if you have an addition, like I've had with a new family, a new baby, and toddler starting preschool, and all the thing that goes with that, I can't expect to be the same version of myself I was 3 months ago, when everything was a lot. We're in a routine and all these things. Sleep was very, very regular. So that's where having that element of adjustability and flexibility and allowing for, and this is a concept of internal load, what load internally that you experience and feel, which is related to rating of perceived exertion, that's still allowing you to apply the progressive overload without going too much on the stimulus side. The stimulus is too great for the individual to handle, and the recovery is compromised. But I will say also, like right now, what makes progressive, let's like my situation right now, situation tougher to know where to go, so to speak, is because I don't have a primary goal. My goal most days is just to do something. And like long term, that's not great. You know, long term, that's not super great. And when we're talking athletes in particular, you know, we need to consider what the demands of the sport are. What are the qualities that this athlete needs to have to be successful? But you work towards them, and you allow for the auto-regulation. And I don't know, we could dive into maybe some concepts here. Like we've already talked about RPE, talked about serve, which is another related aspect. You know, I love VBT, velocity-based training. Oh yeah, that's a really awesome one because it's, you know, it's more of like a GPS targeting system that tells you what's going on. But that's another aspect here of like where we can apply. So like, I guess for the watcher, the listener, you know, let's dive into some other areas. I think that where we can look to progress. Like we've talked about intensity. I mentioned volume, that, you know, density would be another one. So it could be, if you're looking at an overall training schedule, you know, on the long-term mesocycle, whatever it might be, you could increase just number of sessions in a mesocycle, or a macro cycle. But this could also be applied to the workouts or the training sessions themselves, where maybe you are looking to increase volume via intensity, or something like the classical method of escalating density training comes in, or maybe a block of time where your goal is to actually get more sets completed within that block of time than the previous week, and that's what you progressively overload through a cycle.
Right, and that, again, that goes back, you mentioned it right there, frequency is another way that you can change up your training to progressively overload your training. Say you are, if you had been training 2 days a week, maybe you step that up to 3 days. Maybe you go, if time allows, maybe you go 4 days, 5 days, and increase it that way. I like your idea of increasing the training within the session, or increasing the intensity of the training within the session, because not everyone has time to add additional days of training to their week. You know, everyone's busy, and if you carve out time to get in that session, then maybe that's your time to step up your intensity. And again, I think, like we kind of mentioned, intensity is relative to your goals. So, and that just depends. Like if you're, if you're doing speed training, that increased intensity might look a little different than if you are going for hypertrophy or if you're trying to build more strength. So I think intensity is a common, concept within this. But again, that will always depend on what your specific goals are.
Yeah, and the training, like it's not just right on the bar. You know, it's not just 1RM, which again, that's a strength training concept. That's where it's applied or referenced, I think, the most. It can be now, applied to other situations and scenarios too.
Right. So now, we kind of already talked about how a lot of these ideas within progressive overload are kind of overlapping each other. And you mentioned putting more weight on the bar. And like if we're really breaking this down, the way that I kind of think about this, and we've already mentioned these maybe indirectly, 3 basic ways that I think about are, like you said, lifting more weight or adding more weight to the bar. We can increase that volume or intensity. And another one that maybe we can get to in a little bit is maybe just increasing the difficulty of the exercises that you're doing, because if you I mean, we're constantly trying to create a stimulus. If you keep doing the same thing over and over, if you're doing a bodyweight squat continuously and never change that up, your body is going to adapt to that. You're not going to get the same stimulus or stress response that you're looking for. So I guess in terms of that, if you're trying to challenge yourself, again, this might be more of a specific performance or strength goal. Say you're progressing from a bilateral squat to a single leg squat. I mean, that would definitely be increasing the difficulty of the exercise. And your body's just not used to that in terms of, balancing on one leg and trying to squat down on one leg and push yourself back up. So what are some of the ways that you think about that in terms of like maybe adding or increasing the difficulty of the exercises that you're doing in terms of progressive overload?
Yeah, well, there's just a lot of factors to consider there, because
right.
Exercise difficulty, there has to be some definitions to that and parameters to what it means.
Mm-hmm.
Give your example of squat to single leg squat. There's some aspects of that transition that it does introduce a difficulty aspect.
Right.
Now, but that depends on, is my goal to, that I guess would tie to more of an athletic performance goal.
Sure.
Right. Is that the ultimate end goal that I'm overloading towards? That's the end goal. That's the end adaptation.
Right.
Bodybuilder, that may not be the best progression for the goal of hypertrophy,
right?
Which quality we are trying to progressively overload.
Yeah, but bodybuilders probably don't care necessarily about doing single leg squats. I mean, that's just not their goal. It's not something they're focused on.
Their goal is hypertrophy of the quads.
Right. Exactly.
So then,
exactly.
Going from, a back squat, which is good.
Right.
Back squat has a pretty decent skill element to it. It has an element of leverages. So what is your body proportions? How does that affect the ability of the squat to actually build the hypertrophy of your legs?
Right.
Hypertrophy of your lower body. So for the individual, then that's another aspect to wrinkle in here. What does the individual need? If someone has maybe long femurs and a short torso, so their squat turns into a good morning squat.
Right.
Not great for building up the quads.
Right.
Like pressing or hacks, like the machine hack squat. So that progression for them, for the goal of quad hypertrophy, the difficulty, quote unquote, aspect is actually going to a seemingly less complex exercise.
True.
You know what I mean?
Good point there.
So yeah, those are just like, let's say somebody's limitation in a squat is torso strength.
Right.
Short femurs, long torso. So they're
it sounds like we're referencing
training,
Yep.
So that bar on their back is a very long lever. Maybe the Zercher squat is actually their progression to a more difficult exercise. But if someone has a short torso, their lever is not nearly as long, meaning their spine. When I'd say the lever, their spine is not near as long. So their torso and on their torso isn't as much. So Zercher squat may not be the best exercise for them.
True.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So like, there's so many things that like you could look at. And that's where we're going way back to the beginning. What's the goal?
Yep.
And that tells you where the overload needs to be applied, and maybe a little bit of how that overload needs to be applied. And that's how you can start working your way towards it. Right.
That entire time, and that wasn't planned at all, but I just kept thinking about strength training for all body types, which is a great book. So if anyone listening was interested at all in what Korey was talking about different proportions, definitely check out Strength Training for All Body Types. Again, that was not planned at all, but that was a perfect plug for that book right there. So, so yeah, I guess that's where it all goes back to focusing on your specific goals for what you need, what you want the outcome to be for your specific training, and just finding ways to constantly modify your workouts, your training sessions to get the most out of them, whether that is for, like we mentioned, hypertrophy, strength, fat loss, aerobic capacity, speed, whatever that might be. What are some other examples that you're more familiar with as far as increasing that intensity? Because I know that that's a big factor that we've already mentioned in terms of progressive overload.
Yeah, so I think a big question that I've had over the years, and I think a lot of people have, is like, what's an appropriate increase?
Right.
Like, okay, we know we should, but how much should that be?
Mm-hmm.
And another aspect that we need to bring in here is, where's the athlete starting?
Right.
What is their starting capability?
Mm-hmm.
And what is their starting fitness level? And fitness level meaning how developed is the quality you're going for.
Right.
So, like, let's take speed.
Mm-hmm.
If someone has never ran sprinted as fast as they possibly can, repeatedly,
mm-hmm.
multiple times in a session, do that, let's say 5 times.
Right.
Fry them. Absolutely fry them.
Yeah.
So then going from 5 to 10 the next week, that's a huge increase. They're not ready for that.
No.
If some
Definitely not.
they've done some true speed training, they're used to that. Essentially, again, max out.
Right.
Think heavy singles if you're a power lifter. They can maybe handle that increase in five reps.
Mm-hmm.
So this is this is another thing I was thinking about. So years ago, I went to, if anyone is familiar with Tim Gabbett,
Mm-hmm.
Tim Gabbett does a lot of work in what's called workload management.
Okay.
This is basically workload management and it's basically progressive overload management.
Sure.
The athlete starting, where to get to, how do I get there in the safest way possible while accounting for the athlete's abilities. Typically, and this is also strength periodization of strength training for sports.
Okay. Yeah.
Another resource that people could look into here. When you're looking at this, the increases in really both volume and intensity, I would say around a 10% increase per week.
Yeah.
Pretty appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe up once you're getting into 20-25% increases in volume or intensities, that's a lot.
That's quite a bit.
A lot for most people.
Yeah.
The caveat would be a novice.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is a novice, would be able to handle relatively, on a percentage basis, bigger increases because their max is so low.
Mm-hmm.
And max is whatever you're going for, speed or weight on the bar, distance, whatever it might be. For a advanced athlete that has attained high levels of that quality, that is a huge. So 5%, maybe you may be looking at 5% increases, and that might not even be an every week thing. That's another thing that we think of these. We got to do every week, every session, and that may not be the case. And this is where regulation just becomes so important.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow, some way, allowing for the flexibility and fluidity in the program. That's straight up RPE, whether that's athlete questionnaires, how are you feeling today, whether that's VBT. I've even had, what I used to have my athletes do is, this is more of the novice side of things because it's pretty taxing, but I actually have them work up to kind of like a daily max.
Okay.
And then based on what they ended up at, we would back off a little bit. So let's say I work up to a heavy set of 5, and we had educated on what RPE was. Heavy was a 9. So if you're working up to a heavy set of 5, an RPE of 9 means you're working up to a weight you maybe could have gotten 1, maybe 2 reps more on. And we do like 3 sets of 3 with that weight. But a regulation aspect is if you're feeling not good on a day and your weight you got to is 15 pounds less than the previous week, cool.
Right.
Let's roll with it. If you're feeling really, really good because you got 11 hours of sleep and you hit 15 pounds more than the previous week, sweet, let's roll with that. Let's iron's hot. So those are just things I think that are important to incorporate for sure.
Yeah, and speaking of percentages, again, I am working with, younger athletes, usually 18 years and younger. And the way that I kind of explain to them how much they should increase weight, if they're ready, if, form looks outstanding and, they feel good about their reps, is I just say, maybe 5 pounds at a time, like maybe 10 pounds at a time, just to make sure they're doing that safely. Now, to your other point, one of the, methods that I like to use, and I would say I do this more with a deadlift, like a trap bar deadlift, is the APRE method, where they will, and this is kind of where they're kind of encouraging them to increase weight, increase load over time, is that they will start out with, a set of 10 reps. That very next set that they go into, I have them increase the weight, but then they drop all the way down to 6 reps. They stay at that same weight, and for their final 2 sets, so they're doing 4 sets total, for those final 2 sets at that same weight that they did 6 reps, they're just trying to do max reps. Now, I always emphasize safely, just so they don't get injured or anything like that. And if they're able to do 10 reps at that increased weight on back-to-back sets, then that becomes their starting weight for the next session that they do that. And I think that's, for them, I don't know if it's maybe that age or just a way that they can change up their training a little bit. They actually like that because they like that target of, hey, I'm going to get 10 reps on back-to-back sets so that this can be my new starting weight, especially for them. I mean, they're going for strength and they always want to increase weight. They're being competitive with their teammates and everything. So I found that's a really good way, and I've used it for myself. Maybe if I feel like my own training's getting kind of stale and I want to change some things up a little bit, I think that's a good way to, naturally, progressively overload. If you're not feeling great on a day and you're on that first or second set of your max rep set and you get 6 reps, that's perfectly fine, but then you need to stay at that original starting weight going into your next session because maybe you're having a bad day, maybe you're stressed from something else that's going on in your life, but you want to make sure that you're doing it safely. You don't want to jump up to that higher weight just because you thought, your body was stressed for some other reason. So. Yeah.
APRE is one of my favorite methods.
Yeah.
So because it's a no-cost auto-regulatory method. You need a bar, you don't need anything. You need no technology.
Yeah.
You need to educate a little bit on RPE and maybe RIR because or at least say you probably saw this too. It's technical failure, not like, grinding through reps you shouldn't be grinding through. But so again, just for the listeners, anyone watching this, the method that Aaron is referring to is the APRE. Brian Mann is really responsible for popularizing this. He wrote a book he wrote Powerlifting. He wrote a book for us, Powerlifting, co-authored that if anyone wants to look into that. The beauty of it is, here's the beauty of something like the APRE or autoregulation in general. It allows people, athletes, trainees to progress at the appropriate rate. And this is the hard thing with progressive overload is that people don't adapt at the same rates. Let's say all things are equal. You and I we're going to go train like Olympic athletes for a while.
Sure.
Everything's controlled for us. Our one job is to sleep. Our job is eat, sleep, train. Because we are different biologically,
right?
We are still going to adapt at different rates.
Absolutely.
Something like autoregulation and an APRE type method allows for that. So I loved it with my, I used it with my freshmen when I was in the sector, because some of them were just ready. Like you had everyone from someone who had come in with I guess I should say, it allowed those who were ready to progress faster, and allowed who were not to just stay where they needed to be. So if we
Absolutely
get that weight for 3 weeks in a row, I told them, like, that's fine. APRE is autoregulatory progressive resistance exercise. Okay. And those that were like ready for more volume, they shot up. And they bought their motivation. But even the people who aren't shooting up, they're still challenged, right? They're still challenged. They still have a target. Where you can, APRE, there's an ebook on it. You can just Google APRE. There's an ebook on APRE. There's articles and a APRE. It's awesome stuff. So
definitely. So yeah, I mean, I think we've covered quite a bit in there. I mean, especially going to that APRE side, because we were able to talk about, increasing load, increasing intensity all at once. I guess to your point, I mean, that is a great way to progressively overload your workouts if you think about it that way, because you're increasing the volume, increasing the intensity, increasing load at a safe and appropriate rate for yourself. So I know we could probably go on talking about this forever. I feel like this has been a really good conversation. Definitely thank everyone for sticking with us and talking about this. But yeah, we should probably wrap it up fairly soon here. So I think just the bottom line here, to kind of summarize, and I'll let you summarize a little bit too, is that, if you want to get results that you're looking for, again, whether that's hypertrophy, strength gain, fat loss, aerobic capacity, athletic performance, whatever it is, you have to constantly make sure that you're providing a new stimulus to your body to get the correct stress response that you're looking for. Otherwise, your body will adapt, and you'll become stagnant. I mean, you'll stop making those gains, or stop making that progress that you've been looking for. So
absolutely. Yep. And then, it's not just one thing. Like, look different ways you can do it, because I think sometimes, and this is more of a general fitness thing, where this is it's such a long-term thing. You're doing it day in, day out, and the overall goals are like, look better, feel better. The constant feeling that something needs to always get better or go this way can be
right.
And look at other areas that you can manipulate. So we've talked intensity, volume, density. Density, one thing we didn't really mention, part of density is rest periods. So you can manipulate the rest periods. So maybe 1 week, let's say you're doing dumbbell bench press. You do 4 sets at 50 pounds per hand. And when you start out, you took 1:30 rest in between. Next week, drop it down to a minute. Next week, down to 45 seconds, drop down to 30. You were able to maintain the 50-pound weights throughout that phase or throughout that progression. That's a form of overload that you progressed on. So those are just look at your workouts of other ways to apply the concept, but always saying it's got to be just weight or it's got to be just volume.
Absolutely. I think this is, I'm glad we decided to talk about this today, because like I said, this was a great discussion, and maybe this is something that we can, or I can, kind of continue to expand on in some of our other, social media lives, or some of our, the other information that we're putting out. So that said, if you aren't already, make sure that you're following us on all of our social media platforms. Again, we're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X, whichever you want to call it right now, YouTube. We are on TikTok now. Subscribe to our various email newsletters. We'll continue to push out great information there. Additional tips and more information that you can kind of gather from. So excellent job as always, Korey. Thank you so much for jumping on.